let's talk about Return to the Wall by Gene Wolfe, the last book, the final book, volume of the Book of the Short Sun, and the final book of the whole solar cycle, 12 books by Gene Wolfe, which is really his masterpiece, his magnum opus. Return to the Wall is the final part of the Short Sun trilogy, which is somewhere between one long novel and is often described like that, and I think that's right. And sometimes functions more like a trilogy. And I've reviewed all of the other books in the solar cycle on this channel. What I do, as I normally do with sequels, is I'll start with a total non-spoiler comment, and just in case you've not read anything but you're thinking, oh wow, I'm just kind of interested, where does it end up, is it good, is it bad? And then I'll talk with spoilers for the rest of the solar cycle, light spoilers probably, and with no spoilers for this still. So basically, yes, it ends very, very, very interestingly, very effectively, very powerfully. There's some very, very moving moments. It's very clever. The Short Sun is a notoriously tough book or trilogy. It's knotty, it's non-trivial to sometimes completely identify what's going on. There's a big question about kind of exactly how events match up timeline-wise. What are you reading? What's happening? Who's doing it? It's a big book about identity, like lots of Wolfe's books are. It's a book about lots of things, it's in his later kind of late 80s or 90s onwards, tight prose, rather than his earlier, slightly more expansive style. So that makes it harder too. This is not a criticism. I think this is all something he turns to service. The compressed style is something he uses very carefully and intentionally, and it serves the same function as other techniques he uses in his earlier books to create lacunae and confusion and gaps for the reader to kind of puzzle. You see that in Fifth Head of Cerberus, you see that in the individual volume endings of Book of the New Sun, for instance. So I don't see it as a bad thing that it's complex, but it is complex. It doesn't mean that there's not things that are simple to get or that you can't just kind of work out by a first read. I think most people would be able to work out quite a lot from a first read. By that I mean just what are some core things. Of course, then they'll go online and they'll read the theory discussions, which are insane. They're sort of depths of esoterica, a lot of it accurate, a lot of it, it's real, it's based on a very complex set of books, but depths of esoterica you can't imagine. But their first glance, their first experience will be, oh yeah, I've got some stuff, I think I kind of got this. I think most people will be there. It's very powerful, as I say. It has some profoundly emotional moments. It's the payoff of a lot of things, and I found that within in Green's Jungles too, which I've spoken about on the channel, the previous book in the trilogy. It's on Blue's Waters, in Green's Jungles, and Return to the Wall. There are some real payoffs for lots of themes and issues and ideas that he's built up over 12 books, but not ones that he's said, oh, we need to resolve these, or anything like that. It's something where each of these series stands on its own at one level. Short Sun is more closely connected materially to Long Sun, but you want to have read everything really before you read Short Sun. Is it a satisfying ending? Yes, it's very satisfying. It's odd and complex as an ending. It leaves you with different emotions and responses, but that's not because those do not include disappointment, oh, nothing happened, or utter confusion. Some people might be, but I don't mean it's inherent to the ending or something technically wrong that you're like, oh, this is just bizarre, it doesn't make any sense. No, you can get some of what the ending is. Exactly what the ending is hard to say. As in exactly what you're meant to feel is hard to say. You're allowed to feel different things, I think. Ultimately, it's a book and a series, and I think so is the whole solar cycle. This is not a spoiler at all, but the whole solar cycle is at some level about what it means to be, or to try to be, a good man or indeed woman. I think that's made explicit at several points. It's the thing Wolfe, I think, made explicit. It's not dwelt on very much, I think, sometimes in the big theory discussions, because the big theory discussions are about, what's what's the timeline here? Who is this? What's actually happened? Relevant questions, very relevant questions. But I think the big thematic point of these books is about virtue and the moral life. And Return to the Whorl brings several of those. It says several things that happen in Return to the Whorl brings kind of several of the threads about virtue to triumphant conclusion. And I think as a true modern Pilgrim's Progress, the whole solar cycle, and then the Short Sun is a kind of Pilgrim's Progress picaresque like Book of the New Sun as well. It's well worth reading. It's very successful. You need to be up for a challenge, particularly in Short Sun. Final non-spoiler, complete non-spoiler thought is just doesn't measure up. Does the Short Sun as a whole measure up to the Long Sun and the New Sun? Many Wolfians that I've seen would say that Short Sun is their favourite. Others would say New Sun is. I mean, I have a great deal of affection for Long Sun. I think New Sun and Long Sun actually suffer from similar problems that Short Sun doesn't. Short Sun is more confusing and complex. Long Sun and New Sun have different structural problems. I think it thoroughly matches up. I think the three, Earth of the New Sun is kind of its own thing as well, which is a coda to Book of the New Sun. There are also 3 in-world short stories plus several in-world fictions, things which, fables and fairy tales people tell each other in the world. I think New Sun, Short Sun and Long Sun are all different things. They're all Wolfe trying a different thing, telling a different story, even if there are some bits that are more similar to other bits within the sub-series. I think certainly Short Sun, I'm not sure if I'd say I prefer it to New Sun or Long Sun. I think it probably left me thinking more than either of those, and those definitely made me think. So, and it certainly, I was very heavily emotionally invested in lots of things happening. And then again, the second half of Earth of the New Sun, often seen as the weakest section of the whole cycle, not by me necessarily, but the second half of that is profoundly powerful and pays off lots of investments. So, I don't quite know how to judge it. I think it's certainly for me as good. A reread at some point in a few years of the whole cycle will probably clear some of this up for me. Now, just to talk a little bit with spoilers, light spoilers for the rest of the solar cycle, as in mentioning plot points and characters and what's happened so far. So now we have a situation where it seems pretty clear something very strange has happened. It seems pretty clear that Silk and Whorl have in some way merged. It seems to be on the Whorl, and presumably thereafter after the return, because of the comments we've already had from the start of the first book, that the character looks like Silk, except there are also moments, as we've experienced in Green's Jungle, where the same character may look less like Silk and more like Whorl or something. It's not clear. There's a massive question about identity. Whorl has gone on an odyssey to find Silk, to find Corn, and he has been transformed along the way. But his quest, his mission is the same. It stays on. And here we have the payoff of that, as we've had a long section on Blue, both in the past and at the start of the story, and with the Rajan of Gaon and the war with Han. Then we've had a story on Green later, after the Blue, that kind of initial Blue story gets to Green via the lander at Pajaroku. And then we have the story of Blanco versus Soldo, the cities of Blanco and Soldo. And now we have a framing story of the protagonist moving on from Blanco and Soldo to a place called Dorp, a Dutch-themed place, whilst he flashbacks and reconsiders what happened on the Whorl, the Long Sun spaceship, colony ship that he's returned to in some way. And as with Green's Jungle, there is a sense in which you might be picking up a third or even fourth time track, as in a third or fourth set of reflections at points. It's not always clear, I think, and that's intentional. That's something you're going to wrestle with from the start of the book. There are a bunch of other interesting structural things going on in the book that I won't talk about here as their spoiler, potentially. What I will say is that the payoff for Horn/Silk/ the Long Sun story, the Short Sun story, what it tells us about the Red Sun, the Red Sun Whorl, which we've learned a bit about, what it tells us about humanity, the potential good and evil of humanity, what it tells us about being a good man, as I've already kind of mentioned, is very, very powerful, is very well executed. There's a thing where, as I say, we spend a lot of theory time on timelines, illusions, secret meanings, things that are legitimate and very important. But I wouldn't want that to override. I do not think those are more important than a basic theme. Here is a line that in the Long Sun and Short Sun happens very regularly. I think it's less so in the New Sun. I don't remember it really there. But there is a thing that I realised was, when there's a Wolfian tick, Wizard Knight is full of these, where you're like, oh, he's repeating the same expression through different people. That by the way, I should say, this is not a spoiler, it's just a gag. There's a moment here where our narrator says, oh, I always preferred writing down and talking, which obviously I've talked before about the theatrical and dialogical elements of Long Sun and indeed Short Sun. But yeah, these ticks are initially, it's a weird thing. It's a thing where I initially start to find them annoying. What I mean is, I'm like, oh, he keeps using that, but I know there's a point. As soon as I pick up on it, I know I'm meant to pick up on it. And so, though I might find it aesthetically frustrating because it's not as much variety as I want, there's a point. And there's a thing that Wolfe says a lot through the 7 Whorl books, which is something like various, different characters say different things, and indeed the narrator sometimes uses the same phrase. That's what happened. I don't care if you believe me, or do you believe me? That's really what happened, or I can't prove it, but that's what happened. There's a lot of, look, this is basically, take it more at face value than you might be tempted to. And I think recognising that multiple times, this goes all the way back to the Severian is not Christ but a Christian comment. There is a journey for these characters of becoming better, and there is a journey that the Rajan of Gaon has taken across the Whorl. But at the start of this, by the way, this is again, no spoiler. This is from the proper names in the text. We discover that we are talking about a protagonist, who is he under Rajan of Gaon here, or is that just at the very start of Rajan, the title of the Rule of Gaon? I think at the very start of the book, the Rajan of Gaon is the protagonist. What we see with him going to Gaon and then to Blanco, and then what he continues to wrestle with in this book is, he hasn't brought Silk back in the sense that he hasn't brought a political leader back of an ordinary kind, but there is a way in which he begins to impact these places that he goes to, and you as the reader can judge how he impacts those places and whether it's good or bad or indifferent. But it's part of the same journey. It's part of the same discussion about doing good, and probably about what human level salvation is about. I don't mean spiritual salvation. I mean sort of what saving and sorting and improving things is. So both in the personal moral life and in the political context. It doesn't mean this doesn't mean the characters we read about are always nice or likable or do good things. They don't. That's actually a significant point. That it's simply not the case that they're all wonderful people, and we're learning how wonderful they are. But I think we are meant to take at face value that this is a journey about moral growth. Moral growth for the inhuman, moral growth for humans, moral growth for human society. We also do get a lot of mysteries shone light on. Like I said, we've learnt lots about the worlds, but we do get some things where Wolfe just gives us a payoff. I think that's nice. Well, it sounds silly to put it that way, but it's something where he Wolfe doesn't intentionally sit around hiding stuff. I think he wants to challenge you. Like, he wants that to be beyond the surface level. He says that many times. But he also says this is meant to be something you can just read. It's not meant to be an impossible... It's not Joycean, is what I mean. It's not kind of purely Finnegan's Wakian. It is something where you're meant to be able to read it and get it. And I think the fact he just a couple of times, as I think people have put it, you know, there's just he is happy to give you some fan service on some stuff. He's happy to say, look at this. He doesn't always do that in the way you expect. But that is a bonus. It's not integral, I think. You don't need to know some of the things that come up and you're like, oh, that's been... But I think, it's a poignant book and at times sad. I talk about, you know, that I think there's a way in which this is a very hopeful book. But I think it's also, it's something, as I say, the ending is two-note in a complex way that one, obviously don't want to spoil, but also... because it draws on all the things that have been happening. It's something where you're like, okay, what's going on at the end? What is the point of the end? Who are the winners and losers? How are we meant to feel about what the characters have done or are doing or what's happened to them? That, you know, it's complicated, but it is the payoff of stuff that's happened all the way since Severian went to the necropolis, in a sense. I spent a lot of time thinking about the Short Sun books, maybe less about the, as I say, the big theory questions, and maybe more about the characters, more about this big moral theme of the books, and it left me very satisfied and profoundly grateful for having read it. I would love to know your thoughts if you have got this far through the whole solar cycle. I'd love to know what you think the key themes are. I'll probably do a big spoiler discussion of the whole solar cycle at some point soon. It's something I haven't done since I did a video with Liam from Liam's Lyceum back a long time ago about Book of the New Sun, books 1 and 2, volume 1. But it's something it'd be good to do because I'm not sure what format, but there's so much because there's so much to say. But it's a seminal, powerful work. It's one of the most important genre works ever. It is in terms of, I think it also for me never misses. You know, it has a couple of struggling bits. You know, book 3 of the New Sun and Long Sun and the first half of Earth of the New Sun has structural issues, I think, but it never misses for me, and it leaves me thinking. And as you know, as the podcast says, you know, you haven't read a Gene Wolfe book till you've reread a Gene Wolfe book. You know, certainly I feel like there is a necessary rereading soon, just to partly to process all the things I've learned, and part because it is a cycle. It ends. It's something where even though he didn't plan that ending in 2001 or whatever, in 1980 or so, he didn't have it in his mind. It is a natural and organic and successful ending. It's an incredible literary achievement, really. But yes, it is something where knowing all I know, but also sort of having learnt more about Wolfe through reading more Wolfe, and having inculcated the themes of the books a bit, I think going back is going to give a whole set of new meanings and new understanding. But yeah, I will leave that there. I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments, and I'll see you next time.